like, I must ask this question. You are an advisor to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence and the U.S. Office of the Secretary of Defense.
Yes.
Do you get the stuff on the Fed and on the dollar and on what the U.S. is all about financially? Because the Fed is the cornerstone.
Yes.
So, you advise them how to invest, and do you get that stuff? Do you tell them this is useless? Your Fed is.
Oh yeah,
go ahead.
Sure. When I brief, I not only brief the intelligence community and the Defense Department, I've also been invited to brief the Treasury and the Fed, and I tell them exactly what I.
So what do they say to you?
It's interesting. Last time I briefed the Treasury, there were two groups created under a new law, Dodd-Frank, that are supposed to look at systemic risk. So I gave them the presentation on systemic risk. They were very polite, nice to invite me. But at one point I looked at the senior Treasury official and I said, I don't envy you because the banks own this town. And when I said own this town, I meant that the banks control Washington through various corrupt means and campaign contributions and so forth. And he looked at me and said, you're right. In other words, they can't really do anything about it because all the channels for change are controlled by the banks. So I told someone at the Pentagon, I said, the day will come when a naval vessel will pull up at a fuel depot and say, Bahrain, and you'll say, fill it up with fuel, and the operator will say, fine, pay me in SDRs. And for the first time, you'll have a forward deployed military, very expensive forward deployed military that you'll have to finance in a currency that you don't print. And that came as a little bit of a shock to the Pentagon. So,
how many of your colleagues really say, come on, Jim? How long is it going to take to do this? What do you mean, death of money like this? The collapse of the dollar, it takes a couple of hundred people and then it's okay. Even the Russians could bring down the stock market. How many say to you, come on, Jim?
I hear that every day. I hear it. I do a lot of television interviews, and by the way, I think if anyone's interested, I have a very active Twitter feed. It's at James G. Rickards. I don't know if I had it up on the slide, but all of my at James G. Rickards, all of my TV interviews, all of my articles, my op-eds, I put them on that Twitter feed, and you can watch them and go back and see the links, and you'll see television anchors asking me the same thing, but it's based on science, and that's why I spent some time on the science and the paradigm shift. I'm not just running around saying, oh, the sky's falling. I've actually studied the science. I've been in markets for 35 years. I've studied physics, applied mathematics, network theory, graph theory, complexity theory, behavioral economics. And the point is, this is what I see, and so I just try to warn people.
To the organizers, I have these urgent things, and I forgot to say to switch on your microphone. Are we all set with the microphones? Is it fine now, Jim? Oh, fine? Okay,
yeah.
Good. Right. So, before I may go back to some of my questions because I have many of my own. But let me see. I want to get to the participants in first. Is Bitcoin finished?
It's a really good question. I get that a lot. Bitcoin's kind of my least favorite subject, but because I spend time on gold, I get dragged into all these gold versus Bitcoin debates, so I've had to become an expert on Bitcoin just to hold up my end. I don't think, it is a currency. People say it's a digital currency. Well, the dollar is a digital currency. You may have a few dollars in your pocket, but when you think of credit card transactions, direct pay, online banking, the United States has not had a paper treasury security since the early 1980s. Our whole federal finance system is digital. So that's not really a distinction. You say Bitcoin's not backed by anything. The dollar's not backed by anything. So, it actually looks a lot like the dollar. It's backed by confidence, and that's a good while it lasts. What I think will happen...
Backed by confidence, you just said?
Backed by confidence.
Which you just, like right now, trashed.
Which I just trashed, that's exactly right. So if you don't have confidence, it goes away. A couple things on Bitcoin. Number one, it hasn't been through a business cycle. It was created in 2009. We've been in an expansionary phase, pretty weak expansion, but it's still been expanding. It hasn't been through a downturn, so we don't know how it will behave in a downturn. The other thing is that people don't understand, at least in the US, if you buy a Bitcoin for $100 and cash it in for $200 of goods and services, you have a $100 gain you have to put on your tax return. I dare say a lot of Bitcoin transactors are not putting on their tax return, which makes them criminals. The US is engaged in selective political enforcement using the IRS, so wouldn't necessarily be in that position. I think what we'll see is that the currency may die but the technology may remain, because it's a very good open source, encrypted, inexpensive way to transfer title to a lot of things, not just money.
I'm sure you will understand this question, although I'm not sure if I do. Is that threat, and they put this in quotation, is the threat of more overt currency wars enough to keep the peace?
The currency, I would separate currency.
Is there a currency peace?
We don't have currency peace right now. We're in a currency war, and we will be for a long time. I would distinguish between a currency war and a financial war. Currency war is really an economic activity. It is countries competing with each other, but they're doing it in economic space, trying to steal growth from their neighbors by cheapening their currency. Financial war is different. It's malicious and intentional, and it doesn't create wealth. It doesn't even try to. It's just how you destroy your enemy. But financial war is growing. The reason is that the U.S. has by far the strongest military in the world. No one else can stand up to the United States militarily, including the Russians and the Chinese. But when you go to cyber warfare, financial warfare, weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, radiological weapons, then it's a much more even playing field.
Is it even really?
It's much more even, yes. I mean, but the U.S. has great capabilities, but so do the Russians. See, I would say, if you're talking about the Russian military and the U.S. military, it's not close. If you're talking about Russian hackers versus U.S. hackers, that's close.
Give me an example that makes you conclude that, because that's fascinating that you say that the hackers, I mean, you have a lot of confidence in Russian hackers.
Well,
so,
look, there's some,
why.
Yes, there's some real world cases. They're all in my book, by the way, but it wasn't that long ago, something called the Syrian Electronic Army, which as far as I know is really an Iranian front, hacked into the Twitter feed for the Associated Press and put out a story with the Associated Press logo saying that there had been an attack on the White House and the president was injured. Stock market dropped 150 points within seconds. Now, AP very quickly came out and said that was a hack, it didn't happen, etc. But that's a very simple example of how...
Yeah, but I mean, this is not serious hacking. This is detected.
Fine,
like
okay. August 22nd, 2013, the NASDAQ was closed for half a day. We've never had a credible explanation.
And what happened then?
No one knows. This is my point. Now, why don't we know? If it was a technical glitch, they should explain it. If it was a hacking attack, you would keep it secret.
You're saying that Iranians are really as sophisticated in hacking, such as the markets of military as the United States?
The Iranians are good, the Israelis are good, the Russians are good, the Americans are good, the Chinese are good, they're all good. Estonians, this technology is right. Now, no one's using it because of the possibility of retaliation. If the Russians did something serious, we identified it, we would do something serious in response. So that's why I call it the mutual assured financial destruction and the balance of financial terror. The problem is that you may get an irrational actor, or you may get an accident.
Let me just, it's shifting gears a bit, but I'll go back to this again, but let me just cover other grounds. Let's see. Will a reserve currency not be overwhelmingly determined by economic might, military might, geopolitical influence? I guess the question is, will it be? Will the reserve currency be overwhelmingly determined by which one? By is it geopolitical influence, military might, or economic might?
Well, it's a combination of things. You have to have a strong economy, because why would anyone want your money if there was nothing to buy or nothing to invest in? By the way, there's a big difference, this is important, between a trade currency and a reserve currency. Almost anything can be a trade currency, and we do see the expansion of the Chinese yuan as a trade currency. They're setting up bilateral programs with Brazil and other countries around the world. But a reserve currency is different. To be a reserve currency, you have to have a very large pool of investable assets, because if countries earn the currency and hold it in reserve, they need something to invest in. They can't just, sort of stick it under the mattress. And right now, the Treasury market, the U.S. Treasury market, is the only market in the world big enough to absorb the inflows, but of course the inflows are so big because we're printing the money. So it's a little bit self-reinforcing. It's like, no one thinks that Microsoft has the best software, but if you have 95% of the market, people have to buy it. But there's no history of a declining power with a strong currency, or put differently, a strong power with a weak currency. So as the U.S. retreats around the world, and as we trash our own dollar, these two things will become self-reinforcing. But the point of that, the example I showed, is that it can happen very quickly. It's not necessarily a 100-year process. This might be a 3-year process.
So what replaces the current monetary system? ECB, Bitcoin, of course, you just said no. Gold, you made gold king at the opening of your statements.
Yeah.
It's a gold day, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody's been speaking gold today. Go ahead, or is it, anything else?
Sure, gold is a possibility, but it's not. The power elites in the world, when I say power elites, it's not a deep, dark conspiracy. I'm talking about finance ministers, treasury secretaries, academics, heads of state, etc., the IMF. What the power elites want is the SDR, the special drawing right. It sounds complicated, it's not. First of all, the name is meant to deceive people. It's world money, but they thought it would be a little spooky if they called it world money, so they called it special drawing rights. The Fed has a printing press, they can print dollars. The IMF has a printing press, they can print SDRs. They're not backed by anything. The IMF is unaccountable, unelected. It won't happen in a calm period. The next time there's a global liquidity crisis of the kind we had in 2008, they will be bigger than the Fed. The Fed, as I showed in that chart, by printing $4 trillion when we didn't need it, they've used up their capacity. The Fed is insolvent on a mark-to-market basis. It looks like a bad hedge fund today. And so when the next crisis comes, the only source of liquidity will be the IMF, and then you'll see the SDR emerge as the new de facto global reserve.
And this is the worst part of questioning normally, because the questions stay and the time evaporates. So, very quickly. What is Saudi Arabia's ability to affect petrol market in the world of many energy producers? It isn't 1973.
It's not 1973. Look, everything happens at the margin, and Saudi Arabia is still the marginal producer of oil. Now, it is true we have an energy revolution in the United States with fracking and oil and natural gas. And a lot of people say, isn't that great? Well, it's great for the real economy, but it's bad for inflation. If you understand that
So it does exist. It's not BS like one of our speakers said.
No, because somebody needs the oil. If the United States doesn't need it, China does. I mean, China, you can't breathe in China because they're burning coal, among other things. China would love to migrate from coal to oil. Their economy is the fastest growing in the world. They're going to need the oil. They don't have it, and they're going to get up in Saudi Arabia. And so the marginal producer, but also Russia. Saudi Arabia is not the world's largest oil producer. Russia is. So watch Russia and Saudi Arabia, and I described in my first slide or second slide how Russia and Saudi Arabia are teaming up to overthrow the dollar, and together they can affect the marginal price of oil. So they are still very powerful.
Again, a question I don't understand, but says, taking Iraq as an example, Iraq and not Iran, won't the US open a military front trying to solve a financial crisis?
I think we already did that.
Yeah. You mean it was about jobs? Is
right.
that what you mean?
Yes. I would say that not with this administration. You won't see it with the Obama administration, and Obama will be president for 3 years.
He doesn't like to fight.
Right. We may, he's thought we'd fight that. Maybe in the future, but not for the next 3 years. You'll see the U.S. more in retreat than on the advance.
Why?
Because Obama believes in diplomacy and talk rather than military action. He wants to focus on domestic issues. He's ideologically opposed to it. If you just look at his appointments from the CIA to the Pentagon, they're all people who agree with him. So, and the American people don't support it, candidly.
Let me just combine two questions here. Basically, the Fed, both under Bernanke and Yellen, have acknowledged the limitations of their monetary policy. So why are you so hard on them and not on the politicians?
Well, I would say, I was hard on the politicians because I said that we're in a structural depression that can't be solved with monetary solutions. We need structural changes. Those come from the Congress. So I would say the Congress and the White House together have completely abdicated their responsibilities. But the reason is because they're relying on the Fed. They don't understand that what the Fed's doing is destructive rather than helpful. But the Fed's contributions, by printing so much money, they've actually made it easy for the politicians not to do their jobs. A better Fed chairman would have raised interest rates in 2009, stopped QE after QE1, and said to the Congress, we're done. It's up to you to fix this problem. That didn't happen. They papered it over. They made it worse. They've actually made it easy for Congress not to do their job. I'm pretty hard on all of them, Republicans and Democrats, by the way. I don't think the Bush administration was any better.
Where should we put our money then if central banks are just printing presses?
Okay. I recommend about 10% gold, physical gold, not gold mining shares or gold derivatives.
How much gold is it?
Physical bullion. And then usually the next question I get is, well, fine, that's fine for 10%. By the way, institutional allocations to gold are about 1.5%, so a very far cry from the 10% I recommend. Then people say, what about the other 90%? Look at Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett